Today, we're going to dive into the story of Victorian Manchester. It was the world's very first industrial city, a real powerhouse of innovation and just incredible wealth. But it was also built on a foundation of some of the most profound human misery imaginable. Let's get into how this city of contradictions even came to be.
So, Manchester got this nickname Cottonopolis because it was the absolute global center of cotton manufacturing. But that name, it held this really dark paradox. It was basically a story of two completely different cities existing in the very same streets. And this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got this incredible engine of progress, a symbol of Victorian achievement that was generating wealth on a scale nobody had ever seen before. But then, on the other side, you see the staggering human cost. This was the price paid by tens of thousands of people who fueled that engine, a life in overcrowded slums, torn apart by disease, hunger, and a shockingly early death.
Okay, so that's the big picture. But what did that actually feel like for the people living it? To really get a sense of that, we're going to zoom right in and follow a typical family just trying to survive in the heart of Cottonopolis.
So let's picture this family. You've got the father, a spinner in one of the mills, but his wages are all over the place, totally dependent on the global price of cotton. The mother, she's probably working in the mill too. And the kids? Even the youngest children were put to work. Their entire life was just this constant, grinding battle against debt and starvation.
And this is where things get really, really grim. The reality of child labor is just horrifying. One of the most common jobs for the littlest kids was being a scavenger. Why? Well, their small size made them perfect for this terrifying task, crawling underneath massive, unguarded, and constantly running machinery just to pick up loose scraps of cotton.
And after a brutal workday, what did they come home to? Well, this. In districts like Ancoats and Angel Meadow, entire families were crammed into single-room cellars or these airless back-to-back houses. There was no sanitation whatsoever. We're talking open sewers and contaminated water just steps from their door.
You know, when the social investigator Friedrich Engels saw these conditions with his own eyes, he didn't pull any punches. He famously described the Angel Meadow district as, quite simply, a hell upon earth.
So you have to ask, right? Why? How is it this bad? How could a single city produce so much wealth and so much misery at the exact same time? To understand that, we need to zoom back out and look at the massive forces that actually created this crisis.
First off, the sheer speed of change was insane. People were pouring in from rural Britain and Ireland, and the city's population just exploded. It basically quadrupled in only 50 years. There was no way housing, sanitation, or any public services could possibly keep up. They were completely overwhelmed.
Second, you had this relentless, insatiable demand for labor. The economic system of the day was basically unregulated capitalism, and it prioritized profit above everything else. A typical workday was a grueling 12 to 14 hours long, 6 days a week, for wages that were barely enough to keep you alive.
And the direct result of all these conditions? A catastrophic mortality rate. In the city's industrial slums, life expectancy dropped below 30 years old. Think about that. Meanwhile, epidemics of cholera, typhus, and tuberculosis just ripped through the population, completely unchecked.
So you put all this together, and what do you get? A vicious, self-perpetuating system. You've got profit-seeking with no rules, jobs that could vanish overnight, a total lack of infrastructure, and then government policies like the 1834 Poor Law, which basically punished people for being poor. It all combined to lock people into this inescapable cycle of poverty.
Okay, but a situation this extreme, it can't go on forever, right? The sheer scale of the suffering eventually sparked a reaction. It led to a slow, incredibly difficult fight for change.
And as you can see here, this reform wasn't some overnight fix. It was a gradual, hard-fought, step-by-step process. A massive cholera epidemic in 1832 shocked the whole nation into finally paying attention. And slowly, acts were passed to just start, regulating child labor and addressing public health. These were the very first foundations of government oversight.
And the push for these changes, it really came from all over. You had social investigators exposing the horrors in books and reports. You had churches and charities on the ground providing direct aid. Philanthropists started to spark a debate about the moral duties of the rich. And, crucially, the workers and migrant communities themselves built their own support networks just to help each other survive.
But you gotta remember, none of this was easy. Every single step forward was met with a fierce fight. Wealthy factory owners and taxpayers pushed back hard against any tax increases for things like sanitation projects. And those first laws, they were often pretty weak and almost impossible to enforce.
So, what's the lasting legacy of all this? Let's zoom out one last time to see how the struggles of Victorian Manchester literally shaped the world that all of us are living in today.
This right here, this is probably the single most important legacy. The horrors that people witnessed in Manchester forced this massive, fundamental shift in thinking. For pretty much the first time, society began to see poverty not as some kind of personal moral failing, but as a structural problem. A problem that the state actually had a responsibility to do something about.
And the results of that huge shift in thinking are all around us. So many of the basic protections we just take for granted today, things like national public health standards, housing codes, workplace safety laws, and the very idea of a social safety net, you can trace their origins directly back to that fight for survival in the slums of Victorian Manchester.
In the end, Manchester's story is a powerful and maybe a little uncomfortable reminder that progress and innovation always come at a price. And it forces us to ask ourselves a pretty tough question. As we continue to innovate at a blinding pace in our own time, what are the hidden human costs of our progress today, and who exactly is paying for them?